Look at this one. Can't even hold the rifle right. They're sending us children from the chair force now, expecting us to turn them into warriors? She can end you, all right. With a case of terminal boredom, the crowd of hardened Marines, Army Rangers, and Navy sailors chuckled, the sound sharp and cruel in the oppressive heat of the Yuma Proving Ground. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, a man carved from granite and institutional arrogance, paced before the firing line, his voice a bullhorn of condescension. He stopped directly behind Senior Airman Anya Sharma, whose small frame seemed swallowed by her fatigues and the massive M210 enhanced sniper rifle she was cradling. She didn't react. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, hidden behind ballistic glasses, remained fixed downrange, her posture a study in placid neutrality. Her silence was a vacuum in the storm of Rourke's scorn, a void that seemed to pull all the sound and fury into itself and nullify it. In the observation tower looming over the range, for men in sterile, rankless khaki uniforms watched through high-powered spotting scopes. They weren't watching the bellowing instructor. They were watching the silent airman. But when the senior officer, a Navy captain with sea-pale eyes and a face etched by years of salt and sun, saw the way her left hand applied the slightest pressure to the fore end, a grip so subtle it was almost invisible, he leaned over to the man next to him. "Get her file," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The real one. If you believe that true strength is measured in action, not volume, and that competence is its own credential, type silence below. This story isn't just about a perfect shot. It's about the deafening impact of quiet professionalism in a world that can't stop talking, a world that mistakes noise for significance. It is a testament to the fact that the most profound statements are often made without a single word, in the crucible of performance where assumptions are shattered and legends are forged. The heat was a physical entity on the range, a shimmering wall that distorted the distant targets into wavering specters. The air tasted of dust and cordite, a familiar perfume for the assembled soldiers, sailors, and Marines. They were the best of the best, or so they thought, gathered for an advanced joint service marksmanship course designed to separate the elite from the merely excellent. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke was the gatekeeper, and he relished his role. He saw himself not merely as an instructor, but as a crucible. It was his duty to burn away the impurities, the weakness, the doubt, until only the pure, weaponized steel of a true sniper remained. And in his eyes, Senior Airman Anya Sharma was nothing but dross. He continued his tirade, using her as a living prop for his lecture on the intangible qualities of a warrior. "You see this?" he roared, gesturing at Sharma's still form. "This is hesitation. This is uncertainty. The enemy on the battlefield, they smell this. They feed on it. The Air Force, they teach you to fly desks, to push buttons, to make sure the air conditioning in the general's office is just so. They do not teach you how to close with and destroy the enemy. They do not teach you the spirit of the bayonet, the fire in the gut that makes you run toward the sound of the guns, not away from it." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. He made a show of adjusting the rifle in her hands, his movements theatrical and demeaning. "You hold it like this, Airman. Firm, like you mean it. This isn't a broomstick you're sweeping the barracks with. This is a tool of lethal purpose. It is an extension of your will throughout the entire performance." Sharma remained utterly passive. Her body allowed his manipulations without resistance, but also without true compliance. It was the physical equivalent of a stone in a river, unmoving as the water rushed around it. The only part of her that seemed truly alive was her hands. Her long, slender fingers rested on the rifle with a familiarity that belied Rourke's every accusation. The leather of her shooting glove was worn smooth in specific places, the patina of thousands of hours of dry firing, of cleaning, of patient silent practice. This was the detail the captain in the tower hadn't noticed. It wasn't the grip of a novice. It was the grip of a master craftsman, so ingrained it had become second nature. Rourke, blinded by his own prejudice, saw only a small woman from a service he disdained, holding a rifle he believed she had no right to touch. He saw a target for his scorn, an easy example to bolster his own authority. He was so busy listening to the sound of his own voice, he failed to hear the profound, ringing silence emanating from the woman in front of him, a silence that held more weight, more history, and more danger than all his bellowed words combined. He was building his own funeral pyre, one ignorant assumption at a time, and the entire range was his audience. The other trainees, caught between the fear of Rourke's wrath and a dawning, uncomfortable sense of injustice, kept their heads down, their complicit silence a form of passive agreement. They were here to learn, to survive the course, and rocking the boat was not on the agenda. The gunnery sergeant was the sun in this small universe, and Sharma was just a speck of dust caught in his gravitational pull, destined to be incinerated. The challenge was designed for failure. Rourke announced it with a sadistic grin, his eyes sweeping over the line of shooters before landing, inevitably, on Sharma. "All right, warriors," he began, his voice dripping with faux enthusiasm. "Time to separate the men from the boys." In the Air Force, a few sycophantic laughs followed. "We're going to do a cold bore shot. One round. One chance. Target is a 10-inch plate at 1,760 yards. That's 1 mile. For the officer candidates among us, a murmur went through the line. A mile. A cold bore shot. The first round fired from a clean, cool barrel, which often has a slightly different point of impact than subsequent, warmed-up shots. Factoring in wind, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, spin drift, and the Coriolis effect for a shot at that distance was the work of a human ballistic computer. To do it on the first round was considered more art than science, a feat that even seasoned snipers might only achieve with a healthy dose of luck. And, Rourke added, the cruelty in his smile deepening, "We're going to have Airman Sharma here demonstrate for us. Show us how it's done in the wild blue yonder." He had set the stage perfectly. He expected her to refuse, to crumble, or to make the attempt and fail spectacularly, the sound of her bullet kicking up dust hundreds of yards from the target providing the punchline to his running joke. What he did not expect was the quiet efficiency that followed. Sharma gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a gesture of defiance, nor of acceptance. It was simple acknowledgement. A task had been assigned. The task would be completed. She unrolled a worn shooting mat. The canvas faded from years of sun and exposure, and laid it on the baked earth. Every movement was economical, devoid of flourish. She produced a kestrel weather meter, holding it aloft for a moment, her eyes scanning the digital readout. Then came a small, spiral-bound notebook. Her dope book. Its pages were filled with neat, dense columns of data, a meticulous record of past performance in every conceivable environment. She flipped to a specific page, her finger tracing a line of handwritten calculations. There was no hesitation. There was no second-guessing. It was the calm, methodical process of an expert referencing their life's work. She settled behind the rifle, her body seeming to melt into the ground, becoming a stable, organic extension of the weapon system. The process was almost meditative. She adjusted the bipod, canting it slightly to compensate for the uneven ground. She checked the parallax on her scope, her head moving with the fluid grace of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. She closed her eyes for a moment, and her breathing, which had been steady, deepened into a slow, rhythmic cadence. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. A box breathing technique designed to slow the heart rate to the space between beats, the infinitesimal moment of perfect stillness where the trigger must break. The world outside her scope ceased to exist. Rourke's impatient tapping foot, the nervous shuffling of the other trainees, the distant hum of a generator, all of it faded into an irrelevant, fuzzy backdrop. Her universe narrowed to the reticle, the shimmering image of the distant target, and the gentle, predictable rhythm of her own lungs and heart. She was no longer a person. She was a system, a complex, organic firing solution about to solve a very difficult math problem, and the rifle was her calculator. The silence on the range became a living thing, thick and heavy with anticipation. Every eye was on the small, still form lying prone on the dusty earth. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke stood with his arms crossed, a smug, knowing look on his face, waiting for the inevitable miss that would validate his judgment. The trainees held their breath, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. In the tower, the 4 SEAL captains didn't even blink, their high-powered optics turning the mile-long expanse into an intimate theater. For Sharma, there was only the process. Her left eye closed. Her right eye saw the world through the clarifying lens of her scope. The heat mirage was a river of distorted air flowing left to right, a visual representation of the wind she had already calculated. She had dialed 182 mils of elevation into her turret, a massive adjustment that tilted the barrel of her rifle skyward at an angle that seemed absurdly high. She had dialed 27 mils of windage to the left, a counterintuitive correction that would send the bullet flying into the wind, trusting the crosswind to push it back onto its intended path over its long journey. Her index finger found the trigger. It didn't pull, it didn't jerk. It rested, applying pressure so gradually, so infinitesimally, that the break of the shot would be a surprise even to her. This was the secret: to remove the shooter from the equation, to let the rifle fire itself when a moment of perfect stillness arrived. It came between heartbeats. In that silent valley of absolute calm, the firing pin struck the primer. The crack of the shot was sharp and clean, a single, authoritative sound that sliced through the tension. The recoil was a firm, predictable push into her shoulder, a force she absorbed seamlessly, never losing the sight picture. Through the scope, she watched the trace, the ghostly contrail of the bullet carving a parabolic arc through the shimmering air, a silver thread stitching the distance between herself and the target. The flight time was over 2.5 seconds. An eternity. The trainees, watching with the naked eye, saw nothing. Rourke squinted, expecting to see a puff of dust far to the right of the target. The captains in the tower followed the bullet's path as if it were a glowing orb. Then, after a lifetime of waiting, a sound returned to them across the mile of empty space. It wasn't the dull thud of a miss hitting the dirt berm. It was a clear, high-pitched ping, a metallic note of pure success that was as undeniable as a thunderclap. For a moment, there was nothing but stunned disbelief. The electronic scoring system, connected to the target, flickered to life on the large monitor behind the firing line. A single green light glowed in the absolute center of the target's silhouette. A perfect X-ring, a 1 in a million shot. Rourke's jaw went slack. The smugness evaporated from his face, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. No way, he whispered, the words barely audible. That's impossible. A fluke. As if in response to his disbelief, Sharma worked the bolt on her rifle. The movement was fluid, practiced, economical. She chambered a second round. She took a breath. The rifle cracked again. 2.5 seconds later, another ping. The monitor showed a second green light, appearing directly on top of the first. The single hole on the distant target had just been made slightly larger. She fired a third time. Ping. A fourth. Ping. A fifth. Ping. The monitor showed no new lights, only the single brilliant green in the center of the target, glowing brighter with each impossible impact. She had put 5 rounds from a cold bore into a single ragged hole at 1 mile. It wasn't just a perfect shot. It was a statement. It was a quiet, methodical, and absolute refutation of every insult, every assumption, every single condescending word Gunnery Sergeant Rourke had uttered. The arrogance that had filled the air just moments before had been vaporized, replaced by a profound and humbling awe. The silence that followed was no longer tense. It was reverent. The descent of the 4 captains from the observation tower was like a shift in the tectonic plates of the base's social order. Their boots made no sound on the metal steps, but their presence landed with the force of a hammer blow. All activity on the range ceased. Trainees froze mid-motion. Assistant instructors stood ramrod straight, their eyes locked forward. The universe of the Yuma Proving Ground, which had revolved around the loud, gravitational pull of Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, had just found a new, infinitely more powerful center of gravity. The 4 men moved with a shared, predatory grace that spoke of years operating in places where noise gets you killed. They walked past the line of shooters, their gaze sweeping over them with dispassionate assessment before coming to a stop. They ignored Rourke completely, who had managed to compose himself enough to attempt a salute, his hand trembling slightly. They walked right past him as if he were a piece of range equipment, their focus singular. The senior captain, the one with the pale, knowing eyes, stopped not in front of Sharma, but at the rangemaster's station. He keyed a few commands into a ruggedized laptop, his fingers moving with practiced ease. On the large monitor that had displayed Sharma's impossible shot, the target silhouette was replaced by a login screen for the Special Operations Command Personnel database. The captain entered a password that was a long, complex string of characters. The screen flickered, and a personnel file appeared. At the top, in bold, red letters, were the words, "Top secret /SCI//eyes only." The captain turned, his voice calm, but carrying with absolute authority across the silent, sun-baked range. He wasn't shouting like Rourke. He didn't need to. His quiet words commanded more attention than any parade ground roar. "This range, this course, is an incubator for talent," he began, his eyes scanning the faces of the trainees. "It is designed to identify individuals who possess a unique combination of skill, discipline, and mental fortitude. It is also, unfortunately, a place where egos can run unchecked, where assumptions can be mistaken for facts, and where the loudest voice in the room is often the most ignorant." He turned his head slightly, his gaze finally falling upon Rourke. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed the captain's face. A cold, intellectual contempt. "Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, you are an expert in the fundamentals of marksmanship. You are not, however, an expert in identifying elite operators. If you were, you would have recognized what you were in the presence of." He gestured to the monitor. The name on the file was not Sharma Anya, Senior Airman. The name was redacted with a solid black bar. Below it, a list of qualifications began to scroll, and the captain read them aloud, his voice a steady, damning litany. The air grew thin. The trainees, Rourke, everyone on that range realized they were not just witnessing a reprimand. They were witnessing the unveiling of a ghost, a living legend who had been walking among them, completely unseen. The captain's voice was the only sound in the world, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of Rourke's authority, shattering it into dust. "Operator Designator, Valkyrie." The captain's voice rang out, each syllable a judgment. "Unit Affiliation, 24th Special Tactics Squadron, United States Air Force." For those of you unfamiliar, that is a Tier 1 Special Mission Unit operating directly under the Joint Special Operations Command. They are the Air Force's equivalent of the unit I belong to, and SEAL Team 6 inch a collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the assembled trainees. Tier 1, the quietest professionals on the planet, operators whose very existence was a classified secret. The captain continued, his eyes still locked on the pale, sweating face of Gunnery Sergeant Rourke. "Combat déploiement, Seventeen." Location details are redacted, but they span every sandbox and hellhole we've been fighting in for the last decade. Combat hours, over 4,000. Special qualifications, Master Breacher, Halo and Ha-Ho Jump Master, with over 500 high altitude, low opening jumps, many into hostile territory. Combat Dive, Demolitions Expert, Senior Instructor, USAF Advanced Sniper Course, where she trained Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and Marine Raiders. She literally wrote half the doctrine you are attempting to teach. Gunnery Sergeant. The humiliation was no longer just professional. It was existential. Rourke had not merely misjudged a trainee. He had presumed to lecture a grandmaster on the basic rules of the game. The captain wasn't finished. "Awards and decorations," he said, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a tone of reverence. "The Air Force Cross for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Awarded for actions during Operation Nightfall, where she single-handedly held off a numerically superior enemy force for 3 hours, protecting a downed pilot after her entire Overwatch team was incapacitated. 3 silver stars, 4 bronze stars with Valor Device, a Purple Heart." He paused, letting the weight of that record settle over the stunned audience. "She is not here as your student, Gunnery Sergeant. She is here as an observer, part of a JSOC initiative to evaluate and standardize training doctrine across all service branches. Her report on your instructional methods, on your professional conduct, and on your ability to identify and cultivate talent was due on my desk this afternoon. I believe I have all the information I need." With that, he turned away from the spiritually annihilated Rourke. He walked the few paces to where Sharma, Valkyrie, was now methodically cleaning her rifle, her task complete, her demeanor unchanged. The captain stopped directly in front of her. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture shifting from that of a commander to that of a subordinate. He raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute, the gesture crisp and laden with a profound respect that was almost a physical force. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and formal. "My apologies for the unprofessional welcome." It will not happen again. Behind him, the other 3 SEAL captains, men who commanded entire squadrons of the world's most elite warriors, rendered their own salutes in perfect, synchronized unison. The message was unequivocal. In this place, on this day, they were in the presence of their superior, not in rank, but in a currency that mattered far more in their world, demonstrated undeniable and legendary competence. The trainees, one by one, followed their lead, a forest of salutes rising in the desert heat, a silent, powerful apology and a testament to the respect she had earned not with words, but with 5 perfect shots and a lifetime of silent service. The story of that day spread through the military community not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled first in hushed, awe-filled whispers through the barracks at Yuma. Trainees recounted the tale over beers, the details growing more mythic with each telling. The mile-long shot became 2 miles. The 5 rounds became 10. The quiet airman became a specter, a ghost sent by the high command to pass judgment on the unworthy. From there, it jumped to secure emails and encrypted forums, the language becoming more cryptic, but the message remaining the same. On a message board frequented by special operators, a post appeared under the title Gunny vs. Ghost. It read simply, "Heard a Marine gunny at Yuma tried to teach a 24th STS operator how to shoot today. Anyone got the care?" The replies were a string of knowing, single-word comments. F. Brutal. Valkyrie, the legend was being codified in real time. For Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, the shockwave was a personal tsunami that swept away his career. The 4 SEAL captains were methodical in their response. There was no loud reprimand, no public court-martial. That would have been too clumsy, too noisy. Instead, they made a single phone call to the Marine Corps Sergeant Major, and Rourke's world quietly ended. He was formally relieved of his instructor duties the next morning. His name was scrubbed from the roster. His prize posting, the position he had lorded over with such pride, was gone. His reassignment orders came a week later. He was being sent to a logistics and supply depot in Barstow, California. He would spend the remainder of his career counting inventory, supervising the loading of pallets, a master of ballistics reduced to managing boxes of boots and MREs. It was a professional death sentence, a quiet administrative execution that was far more damning than any public disgrace. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost of a different sort, his name invoked to warn arrogant new instructors about the dangers of assumption. "Don't pull a Rourke," they'd say. Meanwhile, the object of the legend, Anya Sharma, was gone. She had packed her gear, filed her report, and vanished back into the classified world from which she had emerged. There was no victory lap, no gloating. The event, which had been a seismic moment for everyone else, was for her just another Tuesday. Her purpose had not been to humiliate a loudmouth instructor. It was to gather data. The humiliation was merely an unexpected, if useful, byproduct of the test. Back with her squadron, she was just Anya, one operator among a team of quiet, terrifyingly competent professionals. She mentored younger airmen, not with grand speeches, but by showing them the right way to clean a carbon-fouled bolt carrier group, the precise way to pack a parachute, the patient way to read the wind. Her philosophy was taught through action. Competence was the only voice that mattered. And back at Yuma, a small, unofficial change was made. The firing lane she had used, Lane 7, was given a new name. Someone had taken a stencil and a can of black spray paint and marked the concrete barrier, Valkyrie Point. It was a small gesture, but a permanent one. A monument not to a person, but to a principle. Rourke sat on the edge of his cot in the transient barracks at Barstow, the air thick with the smell of diesel fumes and regret. The reassignment orders lay on his nightstand, their dry, bureaucratic language feeling more violent than any punch he had ever taken. In the forced quiet of his new reality, the events of that day at Yuma played over and over in his mind, the memory a relentless, grinding stone polishing away the sharp edges of his anger, leaving only the smooth, heavy weight of his own foolishness. He remembered her silence. At the time, He had interpreted it as weakness, as fear, as the timid deference of a subordinate. Now he understood. It was not the silence of the weak. It was the silence of the mountain, which does not need to announce its presence to the climber. It was the silence of the deep ocean, which does not need to explain its power to the fisherman on the surface. Her calm had been a cage, not for her, but for him. She had given him all the room he needed to build his own scaffold, to tie his own noose, to kick the chair out from under himself. He had walked into her world, a world of unimaginable pressure and consequence, and had behaved like a child banging pots and pans in a library. He picked up a dog-eared copy of the Marine Corps Marksmanship Manual, the very book he had used to justify his own expertise. He flipped through the pages, seeing them now with new eyes. He saw the complex charts, the dense paragraphs on atmospheric effects, the intricate diagrams of bullet trajectory. He had known these pages by heart. He had taught them, preached them, but he had only ever understood the words, the black ink on the white page. He had never understood the spirit behind them, the silent, monastic devotion required to truly master the craft. She had embodied that spirit. She had lived and breathed the doctrine until it was a part of her soul, while he had merely shouted it. A profound, soul-crushing humility washed over him. He, Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, the self-proclaimed forge of warriors, was the one who had been a child. He had mistaken his rank for knowledge, his volume for authority, and his prejudice for wisdom. The lesson she had taught him was brutal, but it was pure. True strength did not need to advertise. True competence was its own proof. In a moment of clarity, he understood that he had not been defeated by a person. He had been defeated by a standard of professionalism so high he hadn't even been able to recognize it when it was standing right in front of him. He thought about the trainees who had witnessed his downfall. He hoped they had learned the lesson he had been forced to swallow. He hoped they would remember her silence more than his shouting. That, he realized, would be his only legacy now, to serve as the negative example in the legend of Valkyrie Point. The thought brought him no comfort, but it did bring a sliver of understanding. He had been a gatekeeper, and he had met the person who held the master key to every gate. His humiliation was the price of that education. Years passed. The sun and sand of the Yuma proving ground bleached the black spray paint of Valkyrie Point, but the legend only grew brighter, becoming woven into the very fabric of the institution. New classes of snipers, Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen would arrive, their chests puffed out with the pride of being selected for the advanced course. And on their first day, before they even touched a rifle, they would be marched out to Lane 7. The new head instructor, a Marine Master Sergeant with a quiet demeanor and eyes that missed nothing, would have them sit on the ground. He wouldn't shout. He wouldn't try to intimidate them. He would simply point to the faded lettering on the concrete barrier. Before you fire a single shot at this range, he would begin, his voice calm and steady. You need to understand the standard you will be held to. And it has nothing to do with the size of your grouping on paper. It has to do with the size of your character. He would then tell them the story. He would tell them about a loud, arrogant instructor who judged a book by its cover. He would tell them about a quiet airman who nobody saw coming. He would describe the impossible shot, the stunned silence, and the arrival of the 4 SEAL captains. He told the story not as a piece of gossip, but as a foundational parable, a sacred text for the modern warrior. The woman they called Valkyrie, he would say, taught this entire command a lesson that day. She taught us that professionalism is quiet. She taught us that competence doesn't need a bullhorn. She taught us that the most dangerous person on any battlefield is the one who has nothing to prove to anyone but themselves. Your assumptions are your biggest enemy. Your ego is a liability you cannot afford. When you look at the person to your left and your right, do not see a service branch. Do not see a man or a woman. Do not see a rank. See a professional. And afford them the respect of assuming they are better than you are until you have definitive proof otherwise. The story of Valkyrie Point became a filter. It humbled the arrogant and inspired the diligent. It became a tool for teaching the most important lesson of all, that the true target is not the steel plate a mile away, but the weakness inside oneself. The legacy of Anya Sharma's 5 shots was not the creation of a single ragged hole in a piece of metal. It was the inoculation of an entire generation of warfighters against the poison of prejudice. Her quiet competence had echoed through the years, becoming a guiding principle, a true north for those who sought to master the lonely, demanding art of the long-range rifle. Her silence had become the institution's most eloquent lecture. True legacy isn't a statue in a park or a name carved on a wall. It is not what you leave behind, but what continues forward because you were there. Anya Sharma had never returned to Yuma. Her name would never appear in a history book. But her actions that day created a ripple that continues to spread, touching shorelines she will never see. The real impact was not in the humbling of a single arrogant man, but in the elevation of thousands who came after. It was in the young ranger who saw a female Marine struggling with her pack and offered to help, not out of condescension, but out of respect for the load she was carrying. It was in the Navy SEAL who listened intently to the advice of an Air Force pararescueman on medical procedure, recognizing the quiet authority of a subject matter expert, regardless of the uniform they wore. It was in the culture of an entire fighting force, slowly, incrementally, learning to value the content of a warrior's character over the superficial details of their appearance. The standard she set that day with her calm, her precision, and her profound silence became a living entity. It lives in the instructors who tell her story. It lives in the trainees who hear it and carry its lesson into combat. It lives in the quiet professionals across every branch of service who let their actions speak for them, who know that respect is a currency earned in silence and paid in deeds. True strength does not need to roar. It simply is. It is the steady hand, the calm eye, the disciplined mind. It is the competence that shines brightest when the pressure is greatest, a beacon that guides others through the storm. The story of Valkyrie Point is more than a tale about a perfect shot. It is a reminder that the most powerful force in the world is not noise, but the focused, disciplined application of skill, a force that can shatter assumptions, humble the arrogant, and forge a legacy of excellence that will endure long after the sound of the shot has faded. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.